So Kyle and I and all the speakers today are part of Friends of Socialist China. The book, China Changes Everything, was published a few months ago, and 7 of the 33 authors of the book will be speaking about the content of their chapters as it relates to this year's rapid global changes. They'll be connecting their subject to today's theme, which is China's global green revolution. Last year, China cemented its position as the world's leader in green energy production and innovation. Green technology production was more than a third of China's economic growth. 3/4 of China's PhD graduates majored in math, science, and engineering and agriculture. In the last 25 years, the number of clean energy patents by China rose from 18 to 700,000, over half the patents in green technology in the world. China is on track to have nearly a half of the world's total renewable power by 2030. They've produced 90% of the world's solar panels, 82% of all the wind turbines, 70% of all the electric vehicles. An EV in China now costs less than $10,000. China developed an EV battery that can be charged in 5 minutes and driven for about 250 miles, a generation ahead of the rest of the world. At the same time China produced EVs, they were building EV charging stations, which makes sense, all across the country, a reflection of the government's centralized planning. Recently, China just developed a battery swapping technology. So now you drive your EV into a charging station and exchange your depleted battery for one that's fully charged in 3 to 5 minutes. Global warming has accelerated significantly over the last decade, with the heating rate nearly doubling. This is in large part to the record high fossil fuel emissions. However, China's carbon emissions peaked in early 2024 and has been flat or falling since early 2026. That's 6 years ahead of their goal, which was 2030. Their target for carbon neutrality is by 2060. The US war on Iran is speeding up the world's investments in China's renewable energy technology, strengthening China's ties with countries across Asia, Europe, and Latin America, and Africa. Nearly half the population of Africa has had no access to electricity due to the legacy of Western colonialism. China's become a key supplier of affordable solar panels, batteries, and wind technology to Africa in just 12 months. In the book, Greg Dunkel wrote a chapter called China Helps Africa Harness the Sun. In a remarkable example of international solidarity, Cuba, with the aid of China, has more than tripled its solar power production, one of the fastest renewable energy transitions ever achieved by a developing country. China helped Cuba develop 49 new solar park farms and plan to complete 92 in the next couple years by 2028. Cuba's solar power production has jumped from 6% last year to over 20% this year. From 6% to 20% in 1 year. China sent the first electric bus to Havana 20 years ago. Then in 2015, because of the blockade by the US, fuel shortages increased. So in the next 2 years, China sent Cuba a fleet of electric scooters, tricycles, and cars. Cuba's goal is to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels and gain independence from the US blockade and become completely carbon neutral by 2050. Some of the questions that speakers today are going to address are, why has China become a leader in the global green revolution? Why is China's green technology so accessible to other countries? How does centralized planning in China compare to free markets in the West? And what changes has China gone through on its path towards socialism? So Kyle is going to introduce the 2 co-chairs for the day.
Oh, yes. So I'm have the honor to introduce Sarah Flounders and Carlos Martinez, who are going to co-chair this presentation. Sarah Flounders is our book coordinator. She has co-authored and organized 10 other anthologies challenging U.S. militarism and war. She's been an anti-imperialist political activist and author committed to a socialist future for over 50 years. She helps coordinate the work of the International Action Center, the United National Anti-War Coalition, and Sanctions Kill, and is a contributing editor of Workers' World News. Carlos Martinez is an author, researcher, and political activist from London. He's the author of The East is Still Red, Chinese Socialism in the 21st Century, and The End of the Beginning, Lessons of the Soviet Collapse. And he is co-editor with Keith Bennett of People's China at 75, The Flag Stays Red. Carlos is the co-editor of Friends of Socialist China and a coordinating committee member of the International Manifesto Group. I think I hand it over to Sarah now.
Okay. Thank you, Kyle and Lynn and folks in Portland. Well, President Trump departed yesterday from a state visit to China, and every U.S. commentator, it seems, dwelled on the fading role of U.S. power and the unsolvable dilemma in the Straits of Hormuz that the U.S. initiated war on Iran created for the whole world. Even Trump commented the U.S. is a fading power. U.S. power, U.S. weapons have been severely tested by Iran's determined resistance and by the swarms of Iran's cheap mass-produced drones. 16 U.S. bases in West Asia are not functional. The almighty dollar is no longer the only currency in world trade. Tariffs tumbled down. The sanctions are collapsing as countries are determined to trade with each other. Much to U.S. imperialism's frustration, this visit to China came at a moment in history when the whole colonial structure of West Asia, especially in the Gulf states, was unraveling. And our talks today will focus on China's spectacular advances, the Green Global Revolution. It's really the question, how is China able to be a positive force in solving the great global challenges of poverty, hunger, and climate crisis, while the U.S. seems only capable of producing destructive weapons and waging relentless wars? Is there a fundamental difference in the ownership of resources that opens new life possibilities? So that's today's question, and I'll then hand it to Carlos for his opening comments and also how we'll proceed technically today. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So yeah, one small bit of housekeeping, which is that we turn off chat during the presentations, but please do, if you've got any questions or short comments, please put them in the Q&A function on Zoom at the bottom of the screen. And for now, continue to post where you're tuning in from. So I'll just make a couple of brief opening remarks. Firstly, of course, thank you to the organizers, thank you to the speakers, and thank you to the attendees. This is a hugely important topic for a bunch of reasons, but I'm going to just briefly talk about two of them. First, the climate crisis is one of the defining issues of our era. I would argue that it's the biggest existential crisis faced by humanity. And, we actually have a pretty narrow window to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown. But, for all of these years, and there's been international consensus on the nature of the climate crisis for coming up for 4 decades, but we've essentially been relying on the capitalist class to solve it for us. And surprise, surprise, they've made precious little progress. And now, it was maybe a little bit more on the radar 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but now even so-called progressives are keeping quiet about it because they're more focused on spending humanity's resources on rising militarism against Iran, against Gaza, against Russia, against China. Here in Britain, for example, we've got a Labour government which is presiding over an unprecedented increase in military spending for the sake of dealing with a supposed threat, in reality non-existent threat from Russia, from the ultimate bogeyman Vladimir Putin, and any kind of plans and any kind of promises in relation to climate change and renewable energy and electric vehicles and so on have been more or less forgotten about. The second reason it's so important for our purposes is that China's done so much on this issue to the point that it's responsible for more than half of the world's renewable energy capacity, and we're going to hear a lot more about that over the course of the meeting. China's done so much that increasingly people can't ignore what it's done. So progressive people, environmentalists, and others are starting to notice what China's doing and therefore challenge their prejudices about China. And that's especially true for young people. And this feeds into the best of what's been described as China maxing, where people are recognizing China's achievements and starting to understand how those achievements are connected to China's economic, political, and social system. And I think that's a process that we can really help with. So, with those opening remarks out of the way, I'm going to introduce Dee Knight, who I think is going to speak for just 5 minutes. Dee is part of the Friends of Socialist China. He is on the DSA's China Working Group. His chapter in China Changes Everything is Leadership was the Key in China's Targeted Poverty Alleviation Campaign. Dee's played a major role in organizing the distribution on many platforms of the book China Changes Everything. Dee is the author of multiple books, including last year's Befriending China, People to People Peacemaking, and a few years before that, A Realistic Path to Peace from Genocide to Global War and How We Can Stop It. Go ahead, Dee.
Thank you. Teddy, can you put my slides up, please? I'm asking for the slides because my presentation largely is about how you can get the book, China Changes Everything. Um, just for starters, although you don't really need to go to worldviewf@gmail.com to order the book, in case you have any suggestions or questions, you can use that email. But now let's change to the slide that shows how to get the book. Notice that it's possible to use the QR link to get a discounted paperback 60% off the list price, also known as $15. Notice that it's available in printed form as an EPUB on several platforms, including Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes and Noble, as well as bookshop.org. Bookshop.org, for the uninitiated, is also a window to the independent bookstores across the USA. I just want to make the point that you can make orders of bulk copies of the book by going to iacenter.org/donate. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in just a minute. But first, let's go to the next slide so that you can see how you can activate that wonderful individual discount order. Notice that I've placed this long URL just above the words "this link." In case you can't see it clearly, it's https://shop.ingramspark.com/p/084 params equals, and then a whole string of letters. I'm not going to read all those letters, but I want you to know it. And of course, if you have this screen on your screen, wherever you are, you can use your phone to activate that QR code and it'll take you right there. I would like now to share my screen just to show another really nice feature of a way to get the book. What's happening? Okay. Well, it's not letting me do it. So, oh, wait a second. I'm gonna it looks like I'm going to have to tell you about the other exciting way to get not only the full text of the book, but also video commentaries with quite a number of the authors. You just need to go to iacenter.org and uh, uh, click on the image of the book and then scroll down a bit, and you will be able to see the full text of each chapter and also click on the author's names in order to hear each of us say a little bit of something about how we did the research, why we took the topic we did. In my case, for example, I tell about going to Southwest China and interviewing people that were involved in planning and implementing the targeted poverty alleviation program. Thank you, Teddy. Now you can see that at iacenter.org. Look at me, I'm on the screen 2 times now. Um, and that's true of most of the authors. And in addition, you can see it says full chapter. You can read each of these chapters without paying a nickel. We don't mind if you do that because the whole point is to have this amazing story available to everyone. However, we do very much encourage you to get your own copy of the book. It's well worth the price, and it's actually selling quite well, I'm happy to report, and I encourage you to get it. I believe that's all I have to say about this now. We're excited to share the book, and we're making sure that we can share our stories of the process of making the book at the same time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dee. And it's taken a lot of work to make this book accessible, and we're going to make it even more accessible in the period ahead. It's going to be a podcast. We're going to have an audio book along with the videos and the downloadable and in bookstores. We want to open a conversation. I'm going to give the introduction of the two folks who did the opening. Lynn Neely, who opened our program, was a biology teacher in New York City for 20 years. She now lives in Portland and focuses on political education in Workers' World. Lynn designed the cover art for China Changes Everything, and she's the author of the chapter, China Outpaces the World in Energy Production and Green Technology. And then next in speaking is Kyle Ferrano, who is also right there in Portland. And Kyle is the editor of the book, China Changes Everything. We really couldn't have done this without his deeply immersing in every single chapter. He is a writer, editor, and political activist based in Portland. He's the author of Why the World Needs China. That's a great book you may want to check out. He's a contributor to Monthly Review, International Magazine, Peace, Land, and Bread, and he currently serves as writer and organizer with our U.S. Committee of the Friends of Socialist China and the Oregon China Council. So, Kyle, you're up next, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful intro. I've been told to speak louder. I hope that people can hear me. My slides should be coming up now. Thank you, Teddy. I have a lot of slides and not a lot of time, so I'll try to go fast. I may not read everything, but I'll try to explain some of these pictures. I'll be speaking about environmentalism in China. You can see here in the center, there's a picture of the Shanghai Maglev, which is a symbol of China's high-speed rail network, which is larger than all other high-speed rail networks in the rest of the world combined. On the right is some offshore wind turbines. China also has more of those than the rest of the world combined. On the left, you see some examples of agrivoltaics, which is the practice of using land that is devoted to solar farms for agricultural purposes as well. As you may know, one of the drawbacks to solar energy is that you need quite a bit of land area to generate a significant amount of power. So any ways to reuse that land and mitigate that drawback is currently being explored in China in these ways. And in the lower right, those cute little animals are Tibetan antelopes, which a few decades ago were an endangered species. And now, thanks to conservation efforts in China, their population has now increased enough that they are no longer considered endangered, much like the giant panda. Next slide, please. Teddy, can you advance? Yes, thank you. All right, so the solar industry in China is kind of the poster child for renewable energy transition. And it may surprise you to know that that wasn't always the case. As early as 10 years ago, the entire industry was struggling considerably. And it's only just in the 2020s that it's really taken off in this exponential or near exponential increase in production. And now China is producing new solar capacity at about twice the rate as the rest of the world combined. Next slide, please. Next slide, Teddy. Thank you. So Lynn mentioned this a little bit. China is also undisputedly the leader in every type of renewable energy and green technology. Solar, wind, nuclear capacity, electric vehicles, and batteries. And you can see from these, in the lower right corner is some infographics from the International Energy Association that shows just how dramatic all these increases have been just in the last few years. Next slide. Thank you. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the political aspects and history of the reform era in China, which, as you may know, is the rapid industrialization that China went through in the 80s and 90s had a lot of damaging environmental consequences. And Chinese cities got a reputation, at least in Western media, for being highly polluted, as you can see from these photos. That's no longer the case. China's major is now a very clean air. I can personally attest to it. And if you go there, you'll see the skies are quite clear. And I'm going to make the case that environmental policy in China and this dramatic change actually has a lot of continuity with the reform era up until the present day. Next slide, please. Can you advance the slide, Teddy, please? Thanks. So this is illustrated, I think, by this quote by Deng Xiaoping in 1986, though really he was saying it all throughout the 80s. I'm just going to read it real quick. Wealth in a socialist society belongs to the people. To get rich in a socialist society means prosperity for the entire people. The principles of socialism are, first, development of production, and second, common prosperity. We permit some people and some regions to become prosperous first for the purpose of achieving common prosperity faster. Now, when Deng said this, no one really took him seriously in the West. Now, a few decades later, we are seeing that his promises are being fulfilled currently. The slogan common prosperity may be recognized from a recent initiative by the Communist Party starting just a few years ago. But actually, this was really the plan all along. It has a long history of being used in party communications even before Deng. Deng did not invent it either. It's from the 1950s or perhaps earlier. So 40 years on from this, the income gaps in China are starting to narrow. For example, the rural-urban gap between ethnic minorities and inequality overall has been falling for the last 10 years as measured by the Gini index for China. Thank you. So go back to the next slide. Thanks. One of the ways this is illustrated, I think, is by the very impressive reforestation initiative in China, which has doubled forest coverage in the country since 1980. More new trees are planted in China than the rest of the world combined, and every new year, enough trees are planted to cover the land area of Belgium. This is starting to turn back the deserts in the 20th century. The expanding desertification of China was a major issue, and now that is starting to reverse thanks to these efforts. Just a few other environmental success stories in the 21st century in China include the expansion of mangrove forests, the increase in wetland areas, and as I mentioned before, the rehabilitation of several endangered species. Next slide, please. Another aspect is aquaculture. And as you can see from this graph, aquaculture is the practice of domestic fish farming. That took off starting in the 90s. And China now produces twice as much farmed fish as the rest of the world combined. And as you can see, the practice of wild fishing is on the decline in China. This is also a subject of the Western press likes to give China bad press, scaremongering about Chinese fishing fleets taking up all your fish. And wild fishing is a very ecologically devastating practice. But the good news is that it is on the decline, and Chinese fishing fleets have been reduced, subsidies are being cut, and regulations are increasing. Next slide, please. All right, so as Lynn mentioned, fossil fuel use in China is also declining. Gasoline demand peaked several years ago. CO2 emissions and coal consumption have also peaked, and the total demand for oil is expected to peak next year. And these are, we're not just declaring a peak when we start to see a reduction. Like, these have been planned by the party ahead of time. And in fact, several of these have been met ahead of schedule. And as the renewable energy continues to take off, as quickly as it is, we can expect the decline to increase. Next slide, please. So next, I want to talk about China's coal use, which is a pretty central topic in the Western press narrative about China. And that's, what about coal? China burns a lot of coal, and in fact is even building new coal-fired power plants, which is not really accurate. I just want to present sort of a corrective and explain why this is not quite the disaster that it's being made out to be. First of all, coal is not the dirtiest fossil fuel. I will direct you to a study by the Rocky Mountain Institute in 2023 that demonstrated that natural gas is actually just as environmentally damaging for the greenhouse effect as coal, due to the amount of methane that escapes during gas transport. And these are comparing natural gas to Western coal, and Chinese coal is actually considerably more efficient. Chinese coal plants have set the world record for efficiency. They burn hotter, they produce more power, and they produce less pollution than Western power plants. And when you hear stories about new coal plants being constructed in China, this is typically the newer technology plants that burn coal at a higher temperature and thus produce less pollutants. And these replacing old coal power plants. Secondly, the capacity versus usage. So just because there are a lot of coal plants in China doesn't mean that they're used all the time. And since renewable energy is prioritized, there are drawbacks to, for example, solar and wind. Obviously, solar is not going to generate power during the nighttime, and the wind isn't always blowing. So during those gaps, to fill the demand for those times, you will still need coal. And as you can see, the increasing regulations and improvements in coal technology and clean air policies have driven a very impressive reduction in pollution. This graph tracks the average pollution in China's three biggest urban centers, around Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. And as you can see, it's back down to the level it was at the 90s, and it's continuing to decline. Next slide, please. Now I will talk about how China managed to do this. How did it become the world leader in clean energy? And it's probably not a surprise that it has a lot to do with central planning and state intervention. So as I'm sure everyone knows, one of the biggest obstacles to the renewable energy transition here in the United States is the fossil fuel lobby. China does not have this obstacle because, first of all, they don't have lobbying. And secondly, the big fossil fuel companies in China are state owned. So they don't prioritize profit above all else. They're ultimately interested in the common good, and that means renewable energy. The Chinese government doesn't have to worry about making a profit or delivering a profit to capitalists. It just makes these investments in renewable energy itself. So specifically regarding lobbying, I want to make the point here that the Chinese system is actually much more democratic than ours. In the US, lobbying is really just legalized corruption. And it allows corporations with the most money to buy whatever policies they want. In China, private companies are allowed to suggest policy to the government through the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which makes a lot of suggestions to the government, and the government reviews their suggestions and then makes policy based on this. But access isn't determined by money. It's proportionally set to get this feedback from the entire society. And of course, the government has the final say, and the party has the final say in that. This picture you see is a floating solar farm in a former coal plant that's been filled with water in Anhui province. It's a very very dramatic picture. Like, it kind of shows how renewable energy is taking the place of old fossil fuels. I guess that's about all I've got. I will turn it back over to Sarah and Carlos.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kyle. Absolutely fascinating stuff. So our next speaker is going to be Janet Mays. Born a red diaper baby, Janet grew up during the reactionary McCarthy period and came of age in the free speech movement at Berkeley in the 1960s, where she co-published with Jerry Rubin the Vietnam Day newsletter. She's a Workers' World Party comrade, web manager for 25 years for the International Action Center, psychotherapist, lesbian, and amateur astronomer. Janet authored Beyond the Horse's Eye, a sci-fi novel about US hegemony of space, and co-authored with Sue Harris and others Evolving Self, a book about interpersonal therapy. She believes in collective struggle and revolutionary optimism. Another world is not only possible, but inevitable. Go ahead, Janet.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be part of this panel. I'm going to share my screen, if I can. Right. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about my chapter, The Race for Moondust, U.S. Imperialism versus China. But I'm also going to be a little bit, I'm going to be updating because more has happened. So there's much fanfare surrounding the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, that's NASA, Artemis II mission, a crucial step toward the United States. I have to get this out of the way. Towards the United States striving to build a permanent moon base before China. NASA originally implied that the first person of color and the first woman would land on the moon. The Artemis capsule actually only orbited the moon. The future landing crew hasn't been announced, and last year, NASA removed from its website its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The mission may depend on the centibillionaire Elon Musk's super reusable rocket, the SpaceX Starship, to ferry astronauts from lunar orbit to the moon. In 21, SpaceX won a $2.89 billion contract, imagine that, with NASA to develop the super rocket. In 23, its unsuccessful explosive launch spewed brown grime and dust onto populated areas in Texas, the Boca Chica area, which Musk calls a wasteland, destroying the fragile surrounding ecostructure replete with endangered species. In 25, the rocket again exploded, spewing debris on the Bahamas and grounding flights at Florida airports. Several months later, it finally achieved a largely successful test flight, but the moon landing is still behind schedule, now expected no earlier than 28. The China National Space Administration, meanwhile, also forges ahead with a multitude of successful tests of its reusable rockets. So what's this really all about? The United States is hell-bent on building mining stations on the moon's South Pole region before China because of another kind of dust, moon dust, replete with helium-3, touted to be the fuel for an emerging technology that will provide clean, abundant energy. In 21, Beijing's Research Institute of Uranium Geology announced that China's lunar Chang mission had identified this precious mineral on the moon. Helium-3 fusion technology promises to produce clean nuclear energy without radioactive waste. Fossil fuel and even current nuclear power plants would become obsolete. I imagine coal as well, all the stuff that we just talked about. Staff workers with the return of that capsule, Chang 5's probe, in North China's Mongolia Autonomous Region in 2020. It's a picture of that. The lander had unfurled the first China flag on the moon. The DC-based newspaper, The Hill, described the crystal mineral sample as exceedingly tiny, actually about 1/10 the size of a human hair. The helium-3 that it contains has the potential to change the world. 3 space missions bringing back helium-3 rich moon dust would provide our entire planet with energy for a year. 1 cargo bay load, that's about 25 tons, on a space shuttle would power the United States for a year, a value of about $3 billion a ton. The country that corners the moon mining market of helium, this is from The Hill, 3, would control, in essence, the Earth. The moon could become the Persian Gulf of the mid to late 21st century. Clean and abundant fusion energy would change the world in ways that can barely be evaluated. China, along with Russia, plans to complete construction of a lunar base by 2035. This is an artist's rendering of that. Then it will mine the helium-3 crystal contained in vast quantities on the moon's regolith. That's the layer of unconsolidated rocky material covering bedrock. That's the white stuff that the astronauts so long ago first stepped on the moon. That was the white dust they were stepping on. Since China has accelerated plans for lunar exploration and mining, panicked imperialist countries, particularly the US, cannot sit by and watch. They are horrified that China could be the first country to gather precious moon dust. If they lose this space race, imperialist governments and corporations would lose the opportunity to corner the multi-billion-dollar market for this potentially planet-saving technology. With artificial intelligence rapidly emerging as the wave of the future, larger availability of helium-3, extremely rare on Earth, would also ultimately reduce power consumption by this technology. It takes a whole lot of energy to get those questions answered that we put on our search engines. Known by investors as the fuel of quantum era, a small amount of helium-3 can enable trillions of dollars in economic value. Whoever controls this resource controls a critical bottleneck in the quantum race. NASA estimates alone suggest a potential supply worth trillions if even partially tapped. That's why contracts are already being written and why venture capital is quietly pouring in. The ultimate value is mammoth profits for the United States, its imperialist allies, and its private companies. If they control the mining, transporting, and fusion processing of helium-3. Given the fragile condition of Western economies, it is a space race the imperialists cannot afford to lose. The Washington Examiner, a right-wing U.S. news outlet, attacked China in 23 with the fabricated, ominous statement, quote, "If the West turns away from space, China, which cares little for human rights, right, will forge ahead. A Chinese-dominated space frontier is not a future that anyone should want." Actually, a Chinese-dominated space frontier is a future that everyone should want. If our planet is to survive climate disaster, it is imperative that imperialists lose the moon race. Far from seeking to profit, as we know, China's approach to international energy production is in fact geared toward protecting the planet. Socialist China's international humanitarian policies are aimed at saving the globe from climate catastrophe. While corporations scheme to gain riches, the Pentagon's militarization of space is intensifying to protect capitalist interests and uphold U.S. domination. The establishment of the Space Force in 2019 sent a clear warning to Russia, China, Iran, and any other countries in the United States that the United States considers global competitors, informing them that the imperialist U.S. is staking its claim to supremacy over space technology and over outer space itself. Billions of taxpayer dollars, sorely needed for the health and welfare of human beings worldwide, are funneled into these corporate and militarized space programs instead. As exciting and as visionary space exploration appears to be, capitalists manipulate scientific curiosity and discovery into profit-making ventures. And finally, what will happen to our beautiful natural satellite when it's mined? Not to mention what will happen to the miners. Stay tuned, because we are going to compare how China and the U.S. are addressing this issue in the future discussions. And by the way, just for fun, Palestine on the Moon is a new children's book by Palestinian author Susan Abuhawa. In that book, Palestinians save the world using moon dust. In the story, there's a magic part of the moon called Al-Qassam, which is the act of dividing, allocating, or distributing something among people. Palestinians use magic moon dust to get free and free the rest of the world from the people and their affiliates who stole Palestine and rob and oppress other countries. And that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. That was fascinating and challenging. Next, I want to introduce KJ No. KJ is an award-winning journalist, a political analyst, an educator, focusing on geopolitics and political economy of the Asia Pacific. Originally from South Korea, KJ writes for Counterpunch, Dissident Voice, Black Agenda Report, Asia Times, Popular Resistance, Monthly Review Online, Presian, Nokasek Panyan, Marxblatt, The People's Daily, Global Times, and Beijing Review, and that's just a few. He also does frequent commentary and analysis on various news channels and was the co-host of the China Report on Breakthrough News Network. So, KJ, you're up next, and thank you.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm delighted to share my slides with you. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, but
Yes,
it should be in
yes.
slideshow form.
And I know that I should put it into,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so I want to talk about what I refer to as the hydrocarbon empire. It's very simply the idea that the Western empire was built on and is still doubling down on fossil fuels. Western industrial capitalism arose through the exploitation and control of fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, etc. So they're the catalyst of the commodity form and the metabolic motor of monopoly capitalist power. They drive commodification and they constitute its key feedstock and raw material. In other words, the empire is based on its control of petroleum, and it exacts a global tribute through its control of the currency that mediates the distribution and consumption, i.e. the petrodollar. And of course, we all know that it threatens and overthrows governments and goes to war to hold on to that control and privilege. Now, if we pan out, we have to understand that in terms of global national development for the global South, there have always been three assumptions. One is that you have to become more Western if you want to develop. That is to say, you become more secular, you institute Western institutions, and you take on Western assumptions and principles and ideas. You also have to become more capitalist, specifically more neoliberal capitalist. And of course, the third assumption is if you want to develop your country, you have to become more carbon intensive. And all of these things mean that you become more dependent on the global north, and you essentially become a neo-colonial subcontractor to the Western capitalist system. Well, what happened was China broke the mold on this. It showed that it's possible to do non-Western development. You develop on your own terms with your own culture. It showed that it's possible to harness capitalism for socialist development. China has capitalists, but it is not capitalist. And it also showed that it's possible to move towards a fundamental ecological development. This is groundbreaking and transformative. And if you want the data, there's a very important research document that was released by Ember, a think tank. And essentially they say that China's ecological civilization is leading the world away from fossil fuel economies and potentially leading the way out of catastrophe, climate catastrophe. It's a possible direction out. So as they say in their own words, it's rapidly reshaping energy choices for the rest of the world, creating the conditions for a decline in global fossil fuel use. And it's demonstrating that decarbonization can go hand in hand with industrial upgrading, job creation, improved quality of life, i.e. development. Of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all blueprint, but it is fundamentally reshaping the economics of energy around the world. The New York Times, which is notorious for its anti-China bias, still has to acknowledge that the Chinese dominance of clean energy industries is creating conditions for a decline in fossil fuel use. Kind of an extraordinary statement from the New York Times and its bevy of hate criminal reporters. The scale of Chinese production has driven the price of technologies down almost by 90%. It showed that 90% of wind and solar projects produced power more cheaply than the cheapest available fossil fuel alternative. China is the engine changing the energy landscape, not just domestically, but in countries around the world. Here are some examples. 20 megawatt offshore wind turbine. This is a 16 megawatt wind turbine. It will generate 44 gigawatt hours of energy per year. And it's not just large scale, massive energy projects. It's also creating micro projects that are also revolutionizing the energy utilization. So, for example, they have invented what is called a thermohaline convection enhanced solar distillation device. Essentially, it's a suitcase-sized device which is powered by solar energy, and it can create 4 to 6 liters of drinkable water per hour, enough for one family. If you got 1,000 of these out to, for example, Palestine, it would be a complete and total game changer. This is what it looks like. And then Chinese have also pioneered a way to extract lithium sustainably from seawater. As you know, lithium is used in lithium-ion batteries, and they have shown that there's a way of extracting lithium from seawater using, once again, solar energy, a transpiration method similar to the way that the plants store water, store energy, and draw water from the soil. So there are 230 billion tons of lithium in seawater. There's tremendous promise here. But of course, when you talk about these types of things, you will always have the naysayers who say, but at what cost? The simple answer to that is actually at very little cost. I mean, for example, if you look at solar panels, right now the Chinese have made them so affordable that it's being used as fencing material because it's cheaper than the cheapest fencing material out there. It becomes essentially a dual-use fence. And people have also said, well, China is the greatest greenhouse gas or carbon dioxide emitter. But once again, that is completely wrong because carbon dioxide accumulates in the atmosphere. So you have to look at the accrued amount of carbon, not what a country emits in a day or a month or a week or a year. It's the total accrued debt. If you want to think of an analogy, it's not how much you put on your credit card daily that matters. What really matters is your total credit card debt. And if you think of it in that terms, China is actually a total carbon creditor. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of the West. So if you look at accrued carbon dioxide emissions by select countries, you can see that the United States and Canada are about 10 times that of China. And of course, you also have to remember that a lot of China's greenhouse gas emissions are actually the West's emissions that have been offshored through manufacturing. If you want to do kind of an analysis of responsibility, according to Jason Hickel, about 92% of the carbon emissions that have gone above, that have caused us, that have put us at risk, are due to the global north. The global south is responsible only for 8%. The US is responsible for 40% by itself. You can do the calculation. I won't go into it, but you calculate the total safe carrying amount of the atmosphere, and then you do a kind of fractional analysis. And then you can see that China has undershot its allocation by 29 gigatons. In other words, it has mitigated harm by 11%. It's a net creditor, not a net debtor. People have also talked about coal. Kyle has referred to it. But once again, China's coal is ultra supercritical. It is actually cleaner than gas. And also it's used it as a backup because it knows that the US has an explicit plan to choke off China's alternative fuel imports. And therefore it has created backup capacity in clean coal. Alfred McCoy is a China basher. He says, every global empire has rested on an energy revolution, wind, coal, oil. Because China is the solar empire, it will be the next global bully. And this is a nonsense statement because China is providing renewables as a global good. Once you have the solar panels, nobody controls your use of them. The sun, the wind, and the waves are global commons. It's actually a liberatory practice, not a way of controlling a country or a people the way that you can restrict or control the flow of fossil fuels. So all of this is to say, once again, the sun, the wind, and the waves are global commons, and countries that have the capacity to harness these commons, that is, that when they gain the means of production of energy, have a way to reclaim energy sovereignty. And therefore, this is a tool of liberation. It is, China is helping the world dismantle the master's house, but without using the master's tools. I just want to point out that imperialism is the core issue. It's at war with the planet. We need to stop it. These are some of the ways in which the global north is responsible for climate breakdown, but there is a way out. Unfortunately, the US would rather burn down the planet than let China lead the way towards ecological development and out of colonial subjugation. And so there is a war that is escalating towards China that has to be prevented for us to have a future, certainly to have any kind of ecological future. I just want to point out in closing, Hegel talked about the cunning of reason. This is the way history does a kind of dance of jujitsu. President Trump, ironically, is the indispensable world historical character who may be changing the history of the world. In China, people sometimes call him Comrade Trump. He mentioned the Strait of Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, which is actually the carotid artery of global capital. And by starting an illegal criminal war and thus reducing the flow of hydrocarbons, Trump is inadvertently accelerating the move towards decarbonization. This is not to say that the world is not facing great peril at the current moment or that war is a good thing, but actually Trump is accelerating, forcing the world to move towards decarbonization. And it's also the best promotion for Chinese renewables possible. In fact, China's solar exports have doubled. Look at that chart. It's almost invisible, but it's gone up, exponentially. You can see that it's about 68 gigawatts of increase, the entire solar capacity of Spain. 50 countries have set all-time records for Chinese solar imports in March. And many newspapers and business journals have pointed out it's a clean energy windfall, the 140% surge in China's EV exports. The Council on Foreign Relations says China is rewiring the globe's clean energy future. So in a sense, Comrade Trump is making China great again, and he's also pushing the world towards decarbonization. There's a quote from Zizek on Hegel. He delivers you to the abyss, but he gives you back to yourself to find freedom. Another thing that I think is important is labor is the metabolism of society, and we do labor saving potentially through energy and machines. And there's a thermodynamic and an ethical dimension to labor. Cognitive labor is part of the labor. Just as machines automate manual labor using energy, for example, if you use a washing machine that's much faster than hand washing, computers automate some cognitive labor and they use energy to propel themselves. AI has the promise to automate large swaths of cognitive labor. Many people are what we would refer to as the cognitariat, as opposed to the proletariat. You do cognitive labor. And AI, which is the means of processing and producing knowledge, is owned as a global commons, then it is potentially liberating. But if it is privately owned by the capitalists, it becomes a means of oppressing people and accelerating exploitation. China is pioneering the release of AI as open source, a global resource, a global commons, a global utility. And the US is doing exactly the opposite. Arnaud Bertrand refers to AI as a public utility like electricity. But US corporations are demonizing Chinese AI because they want to enclose and monopolize it. and they want to use it as a weapon of surveillance, discipline, and of course, oppression. This is Alex Karp saying is that you should wake up scared and go to bed scared because of his control of AI. It was also used for targeting in the Gaza genocide. So we have to think about this, that AI, which is powered through energy, is potentially a form of liberation, but it also potential form of increased oppression and exploitation. So we need to make the right choice. We need to demand the right choice. We need to agitate, organize, and work together to build an ecological future which does not exploit human beings and appropriate them and oppress them. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, KJ. And I just want to say that, I know each of the panelists and their chapters, and they never repeat themselves. They always provide new, very interesting information. We're going to, before we open to the Q&A, and you can put questions in the Q&A, both Carlos and I have our own short presentations. So I'll open by saying, or close this part of the meeting by saying that from cities that glow at night to perennial rice that regrows again and again to rice that grows in salty soil, China is opening new worlds, and it's sharing this technology. Now, a breakthrough in sustainable design has created plants that glow in the dark. This biotechnology offers sustainable, electricity-free way to transform urban lighting. Now, this is not just a fanciful, magical dream, avatar in real time. So far, there are more than 20 species, including orchids and sunflowers and chrysanthemums, that have already been engineered to shine at night. While not yet bright enough to completely replace bright streetlights, they offer a sustainable, low-carbon alternative to urban streets and parks. And a very beautiful thing, I would think. China has pioneered salt-tolerant rice strains developed to boost food security through breakthroughs that have successfully turned barren wastelands into productive grain fields across the country, opening millions of hectares of previously unusable land. Commonly called seawater rice, the rice is not planted directly in full-strength ocean seawater, but it can thrive in highly saline alkaline soils or brackish water. And researchers developed these resilient hybrids using wild, salt-tolerant strains and advanced breeding techniques. With rising seawaters, this is a global lifeline for many countries, including China. Now, rice feeds 4 billion people worldwide. It's a labor-intensive crop. It also has considerable carbon impact on the environment. Chinese researchers have successfully unlocked what's called the longevity gene in rice in order to develop a commercial perennial rice. By sprouting new shoots after harvest, this high-yield perennial rice can now produce grain for 8 consecutive harvests over 4 years from a single planting. This is pretty incredible. It eliminates the need for replanting every season. Farmers spend almost 50% less on seed and fertilizer. It drastically reduces labor by 60% and cuts down on the environmental impact. Now, I also just want to touch on, as other speakers have, urban greening. Green development is now incorporated into over 200 cities in China, and it means implementing vertical greening, living green wall strategies in urban development to counteract rapid urbanization. This includes major urban centers like Shanghai and Shenzhen and Chengdu. These living systems act to reduce concrete heat absorption, improve air quality, lower noise pollution, and enhance aesthetics. High-density living walls are integrated into building exteriors, into parking garages and underpasses to seamlessly blend nature into dense concrete environments. The green walls act as natural filters, capturing carbon dioxide and airborne pollutants while mitigating the harsh glare and heat absorption of traditional building materials. Foliage just naturally absorbs and deflects sound waves, and lush greenery in concrete cityscapes is therapeutic and stress reducing. Living walls do require drip irrigation and precise nutrient delivery systems to thrive in highly polluted urban microclimates. And this is made possible through national and local government projects and subsidies. It also involves green building codes and regulations on incorporating sustainable design into architecture. So these projects reflect China's commitment to sustainable urban development. It takes planning. The walls are localized adaptations of the concept of the Great Green Wall of trees and vegetation, 3,000 miles long, as Kyle described in the beginning, planted on a massive reforestation project to push back the wind and dust storms of the expanding Gobi and Taklamakan deserts of North China. This program is entirely financed by national and local governments. And tens of thousands of young volunteers enthusiastically travel to North China in government-funded expeditions every year to plant trees as part of the country's monumental 3 North Shelter Belt Forest Program. Over 66 billion trees have been planted. It's more than if you planted all of West Europe in terms of range. Why isn't this possible in the US? How are all these projects not only possible, but part of the national culture in China today? Why aren't any of these projects even on the agenda in the US today? Now, China is a vast country that 100 years ago was in ruin due to imperialist looting, uncontrolled flooding, massive famines. Hundreds of millions lacked education, health care, and basic sanitation. The 1949 Chinese Revolution and the mobilization of millions changed everything, and it continues to change China today. The difference in capacity is based on the difference between the economic system of socialist China and the capitalist US. In the US, nearly all the wealth is privately owned by a tiny handful of rich capitalists. Every decision, nationally and globally, where these billionaires hold their dominance, is based on what's immediately profitable. Production and investment are driven by market cycles of boom and bust. In China, the overwhelming majority of the resources are socially owned and by law are to be used for the development of the whole nation. So oil, gas, coal, gold, gems, rare earth minerals, water, and land are socially owned and used for the development of the whole society. So too, high-speed railroads, airlines, energy, communication, and most importantly, the banks, who play a crucial role in subsidizing and developing key industries. These key areas of the economy are all state-owned enterprises. They use the initial SOE. Private companies do exist and can make controlled profits, but they are not the deciders in society. The whole population benefits from production decisions that are planned to meet human, environmental, and future development needs. And it's a living, evergreen process. And I will pass it here to Carlos before we open for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Does everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Um, right, well, the bad thing about going last at a meeting like this is that, of course, everything vaguely interesting that I had to say has already been said. Let's just hope that repetition really is the key to learning. So, others on the panel have covered China's achievements in renewable energy and so on. My focus today is going to be what China's developments on renewable energy and in other aspects of managing climate change and potential ecological catastrophe mean for the rest of the world, and especially for the global south. And to give you a too long didn't listen, in a sentence, China's green revolution isn't just benefiting China, it's currently the single most important factor in determining whether humanity has any chance of avoiding climate breakdown. The first aspect of this that I want to touch on is the cost revolution, because China's innovation, its investment, its unbelievable economies of scale have transformed the economics of renewable energy globally. According to the International Energy Association, China's huge investment has contributed to a cost decline of more than 80%, helping solar photovoltaic to become the most affordable generation technology in many parts of the world. So, in most parts of the world, if you're installing a power station, it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be more cost effective to do it on the basis of solar or wind energy rather than fossil fuel. So this is something completely new, completely without precedent. China now produces at least 80% of the world's solar panels, 60% of the world's electric vehicles, 60% of the world's wind turbines, 80% of every stage of the photovoltaic supply chain. Adam Tooze, a well-known economist, has said that there is one country that dominates the entire dynamic of the energy transition globally, and that is China. And similarly, David Wallace Wells, who writes for the New York Times, mainly on environmental issues, says that if you take China out of the global renewable rollout, the global story looks much less optimistic. And, it just goes to highlight the utter stupidity of the Trump and Biden administrations with their tariffs and their sanctions on Chinese solar, on Chinese electric vehicles, on Chinese batteries. China's building a decarbonization pathway for the world, and Washington is trying to block it. Another aspect of the topic I wanted to cover is the Green Belt and Road Initiative. Around 600 million people in Africa currently lack reliable access to electricity as a result of colonial underdevelopment. Africa is right now in the middle of a solar and wind revolution thanks to predominantly Chinese solar panels and Chinese-built power plants. Chad, for example, currently has an electrification rate of 6.4%, but it's planning to reach 53% by 2030, so within the next few years, using Chinese solar. Major renewable plants have been built in South Africa, in Zambia, in Algeria, in Namibia, in Sierra Leone, and elsewhere using Chinese technology, Chinese financing, Chinese investment. And Xi Jinping made a pledge in 2021 at the United Nations General Assembly that no new overseas coal-fired plants would be built under the Belt and Road Initiative. And China has held true to that over the past 5 years. So the Belt and Road Initiative has pivoted decisively green. In Latin America, Chinese clean tech investment is growing very rapidly. So this is, in concrete material terms, what South-South cooperation looks like. Developing countries leapfrogging fossil fuel development and going straight to renewables on terms that they control and that they can actually afford. And I just want to say something about the example of Cuba and China, which has been mentioned earlier. Cuba, as people will know, is under existential pressure at the moment. The Trump administration's cruel and utterly illegal energy blockade is causing blackouts of up to 20 hours a day in some region. Trump has openly stated that his goal is to bring down the Cuban government by the end of this year. The eternally idiotic South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, immediately after the strikes on Iran in late February, said, Cuba's next. And yet, in the middle of this, Cuba has managed to triple its solar power share from under 6% to over 20% in just 12 months, connecting 49 new solar parks and adding more than 1,000 megawatts of capacity, all with Chinese equipment, all with Chinese financing. China's committed to bringing 92 solar parks online by 2028, with a combined capacity of 2,000 megawatts, more or less matching Cuba's entire current fossil fuel generation capacity. And more than half of this is already online. The Ember Energy analyst Dave Jones says Cuba is perhaps in the middle of one of the most rapid solar revolutions anywhere in the world ever. And on top of that, China's donated 70 tons of power generator parts to Cuba, 10,000 photovoltaic systems for isolated homes, maternity wards, and clinics, along with an emergency aid package that includes 60,000 tons of donated rice. So the political point here is that this is socialist internationalism in a very concrete form. China's helping to keep the lights on in Cuba, quite literally in the teeth of a US blockade. And that all reinforces Xi Jinping's recent comment that China-Cuban relations are an exemplary case of solidarity and cooperation between socialist countries. So contrast what China's doing in relation to climate change and environmental issues with the United States. In Trump's first week, he pulled out of the Paris Agreement again. He declared that climate change is the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. He called the renewable transition a hoax to support Chinese exports. The US military is the world's single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases. If the US military were a country, it would rank 47th globally. So that's in the top quarter of countries for its greenhouse gas emissions. And this same administration that's choking Cuba of oil is bombing oil depots in Iran, propping up a fossil fuel order, expanding its exports of hydraulically fractured gas, and it's trying to sanction Chinese clean tech out of existence. So you've got two opposing logics on display. One country, China, is using its productive capacity to install solar across the global south, replace coal, drive down costs, and bring modern energy to hundreds of millions of people. The other is bombing oil-producing countries, sanctioning solar panels, threatening tariffs on anyone who supplies Cuba with oil, and dismantling its own clean energy programs. So, I think you can say that Rosa Luxemburg's classic formulation of socialism or barbarism has acquired an ecological dimension. On a planetary scale, the choice is now green socialism or barbarism and climate breakdown. Green socialism is what China is materially doing, subordinating capital to social and ecological objectives, planning at scale, cooperating across borders to electrify the global south. Barbarism means what the US is doing, defending the fossil fuel order at gunpoint and denying the global south the right to develop. So, concluding, Mao Zedong said in 1956 that by the beginning of the 21st century, China should have made a greater contribution to humanity. And I would argue that that contribution is arriving in the form of cheap solar, electrified villages, Cuban power stations, and a viable global pathway away from fossil fuels. Our job in the West is to defend that contribution against the new Cold War and to argue for the broadest possible cooperation with China as the basis for any serious response to this global crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And we know you always bring new thinking to every event. I think we'll ask all the panelists today to come back on screen. And we want to take questions if there are, or give each of the panelists like sort of a 2-minute wrap up on their observations. There is a question in the Q&A, both congratulating everyone here and thanking, but asked if we'd be able to email the slides to everyone who signed up for the webinar. I do know that our plan is to make the whole event posted within the week or within a few days on YouTube, and that we always also we try to make all of this material as accessible as possible so that folks can use it themselves in classes, in discussion groups, in meetings, not to hold it in some closed way. So I think certainly the slides could be posted as links at that time. That would be very helpful. I was fascinated with them. And let me ask to Lynn and Kyle in Portland if there's questions there that you want to address. We should kind of go through these and then ask the panelists to each take a couple of minutes in their concluding to address one of those points. And if there aren't, sometimes folks don't have new pieces. I think we have a problem with Portland with the ambient sound. Can you turn off? Hello, Portland? You have to turn off your sound, otherwise it makes ambient sound. Not sure why. Okay, but while you see if there's questions there, maybe the rest of us will turn off our sound and that'll cut down the ambient sound. There's always technical challenge to putting on anything.
Sarah?
Thanks, Sarah. We do have a couple of questions from the audience here. Lynn is going to read them, and I guess we'll just let people from the panel volunteer to answer.
Okay, so the first one is, please comment on nuclear technology and how it fits into decarbonization and what happens to the waste product. The second.
Let's just go through them one at a time.
Yeah, that's one.
So
No,
answer
we're
that one,
gonna,
and then
I thought we were gonna have speakers address whichever one they want.
Yeah, we'll do all the questions. Speakers should write it down and then we'll address it. You can choose whichever one you want, or just make your closing comment.
Okay, so another question is, how extensive is China's electrified bullet train in terms of the mass transit system? There's one on desertification project that this person heard that there's some issues with the water cycle table, but that efforts have been made to resolve it. So they want to know more about that. And a question about ocean fishing and how it relates to mitigating the potential employment impacts in China.
Okay. I think we'll just do it by show of hands of our panelists here. You can answer in any order. We do have a few minutes. The library keeps kind of strict hours, so we can't go on too long. But I think there's time for each of us to make a closing comment on any of these questions or your own observations from today's event. And you have to put up your hand.
Carlos has his hand up.
Okay, good. Yes. Thank you, Carlos.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah. I would just quickly come in on this nuclear issue. It's a big topic, and we obviously haven't got time to go through it in any serious detail, but it should be pointed out that China has been investing very heavily in nuclear power and is one of the few major countries, along with Russia and Iran, which has still been building out a lot of nuclear power. France and Germany and the United States both had all had lots of nuclear, but there's been a trend away from it in recent decades. China's investing heavily with a big focus on developing new generation advanced reactor designs that are safer, that are much more efficient than traditional models. and there are literally, I think, about 30 or 35 nuclear plants that are currently under construction in China. Now, that's, nuclear power is a very controversial topic. Um, and the reason it's declining in France and Germany in particular is that the the environmental lobby has been very actively against it. The massive shame there is that a lot of the time nuclear is not being replaced with renewable energy, with solar, with hydro, with wind, with geothermal, is being is being replaced with fossil fuels. So things are going in the wrong direction. But obviously there are concerns about safety, there are concerns about waste disposal, there are concerns about risks of proliferation. My opinion, and I think the kind of prevailing opinion in Chinese policy circles, is that nuclear is necessary for the moment, at least, for the foreseeable future, for maybe the next 20 years, as part of a green transition, especially in countries that have got limited renewable resources. When we're at a point where we can do everything with wind, or we can do everything with solar, or we can do everything with geothermal, or some combination thereof, or indeed with nuclear fusion, which is, which has got the promise of providing us with essentially limitless and free energy forever, with no side effects, and no serious dangers. Until we're at that point, I think nuclears are going to be an important and even essential part of the power mix. Thanks.
And before I call on anybody else, there are a few more questions that I'll just read that have come up in the Q&A. Isn't it odd that the U.S. doesn't want to allow Chinese cars to be sold in the U.S.? Question, this is from Barbara Aziz. Hello. Many thanks for the report. I spent a great deal of time researching in Tibet. Barbara has a couple of books on Tibet. Because of the anti-China attitude by Tibetan scholars and the disinterest by tourists, there's little information about Chinese climate-saving new technology in operation in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Do you have any information in this area? So, actually, there's several chapters in the book, but hopefully one of our panelists today could connect on that. And then, Patricia Ophelia, does anyone comment on the number of dams China has built and how it has affected Tibet and the damage of those dams to flora, fauna, and the life of fish? And we do have folks here who are talking about the dams and the bridges. So let's see who else of our panelists want to address any of these questions. Or as I say, you can make your own points. We can't answer all questions asked us today. Sorry. Sometimes you don't have the information right in front of you, even when you want to. So is there another hand? Don't be shy.
I can go next.
Okay, great. Kyle,
what else
thank you.
Volunteering at the moment.
Okay, great. Kyle.
I'll start with a question about reducing ocean fishing and how that is affecting employment. I will say I don't specifically know of what the plan is to provide former fishermen with jobs, but I'm sure there is one, and I suspect it may involve training them to work in aquaculture, because all these fish farms are obviously going to need a lot of labor to maintain, and there's still a lot of effort that needs to be done to make them sustainable. Of course, it is potentially a much more sustainable way to generate seafood. But a lot of work needs to be done to modernize it and reduce the trade-offs that it introduces. Secondly, I want to the mass transit bullet trains. As I mentioned in my presentation, China has the world's largest high-speed rail network. It's over 30,000 miles in total length. And every year, there are over 1 trillion passenger trips on Chinese railways. A country of a little over 1 billion people taking 1 trillion trips. So most people are taking it, and some of them several times. So it is a very significant form of mass transit. I've ridden it myself, and it's the best train ride that you'll ever have. Mm-hmm. Lastly, Carlos gave a very good answer to the question about nuclear energy and nuclear waste, but I do want to add that as well as advanced coal technology, China also has the most advanced nuclear technology in the world. And specifically, new Chinese plants are using thorium as a fuel, which is much more abundant and safer than uranium. And as for nuclear waste, I think that something important to keep in mind is that China's existing nuclear plants are actually not very substantial compared to other countries. It's the amount of new nuclear plants that are currently under construction that China is outpacing the world in. So there's not a lot of nuclear waste relatively in China yet. So this is a problem that is going to need to be tackled once these plants are online and generating power. So I think that we're going to have to find out how they tackle that particular problem. Thanks. I will.
Thank you. Let's see if there's folks who want to answer other questions that have been thrown at us here. Good, KJ. Thank you. Oh, you have to unmute, KJ.
To say a few words about the dam issue. It's a kind of a perennial trope that anytime China does something which is sustainable, you get a massive counter reaction, primarily from Western NGOs, that whatever China does, it's at some inexorable and unprecedented cost. That is, going solar is worse. Creating high-speed rail is terrible for Laos because it will create disease conditions all around the country, etc. So it's always this at what cost framing. But remember, development is never perfect. We're always in a process, and it's always a progress of improvement. As I said, for example, lithium mining is not ideal, but the Chinese are exploring ways to extract lithium from seawater. Expect criticism of seawater extraction soon. The Chinese are finding ways of creating solar. Then we have the allegations that all the solar is being built by slave labor. Absolute nonsense. But, dams are necessary and also can be damaging to the environment. So there's always a trade-off involved. One of the things that I have seen in recently is a massive push by Western NGOs and Western conservation organizations to claim that China is creating tremendous damage to Southeast Asia by creating dams high at the sources of the Mekong Delta. Now, the thing to understand is China actually is only responsible for about 0.4% of the water flow or the water extraction through the Mekong. And the vast majority of dams are actually in 4 other countries. But it's always China which is getting blamed. So, for example, if I were to, share a little map with you, I could share this one, which here you can see that there is the map. There are 3 dams in China, and then if you were to actually track the number of dams, you'd see that there are several hundred dams built in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And yet it's always China which is being demonized. So I would caution people to bring a very critical eye across about criticism around Chinese renewables. There is always something you can criticize. The perfect can always be seen as the enemy of the good. But I invite people to do some very, broad-based and deep analysis when they look at these types of criticisms, and also look at where the source is, where the information comes from. As I said, there is a concerted effort to undermine and demonize China's approaches towards sustainable energy development. And I think we need to bring a very, very critical approach to these kinds of allegations.
Thank you, KJ. Other panelists here, if you have comments answering these questions or your own closing comments. Okay, not fully prepared. I'll just raise a couple of points. I'm particularly interested in Barbara Aziz's question on Tibet, Xinjiang. And I'd like to put you in touch with Arnold August, who wrote a very interesting chapter in the book and has spent some time in Tibet, Xinjiang, really talking about the huge, dramatic change in everything from life expectancy, 35 years, to 72 and growing years, and literacy and education and all manner of things. But also very interesting projects going on in Tibet. Because of the extremely high altitude, the Tibetan plateau is a place for huge solar, and actually it's raised high enough that vegetation grows underneath and sheep can graze underneath, and it's really helping the land too, providing some both shade and sun. Interesting things that can be done with solar over huge miles, and would be enough to provide energy for whole parts of China with the solar in Xinjiang. That's just one area, but I think it's always good to remember the approach that China takes, and that is, this is a process. It's not perfect. It is to involve the whole population, and this is especially true in the autonomous regions and the minorities, to make sure that they have the highest skill, professional, scientific labor, education, and are part of the decision making and the leading part of the decision making. When I say it's a process, it is trial and error. China's very approach to building socialism is saying we are building toward socialism. We are not yet a socialist society with complete and full equality. We are building toward socialism. Now, the same thing is true in the Green Revolution. It's true with the building of every dam and evaluating what's right and what's not and what needs to be revised. With building every bridge. It's certainly true with the Great Green Wall, where there was one effort, they were using all the same kind of trees, and it could actually take too much water from the aqua level deep underground. They had to modify it and use whole different varieties again and again. And also, you can't have just one tree. If there's a blight, it would wipe out everything. So you need intense varieties of trees and shrubs and undergrowth. So it was a process of trial and error. You can't just stick 66 billion twigs in the ground and have a forest. It takes a great deal. And then the climate changes, and areas that have been formerly only desert might not be prepared for heavy rainfall at all and suddenly have flooding. So that takes learning, and it's a process. So I think that's what's interesting is looking at China's approach to this. Even as they share it with the world, they give very honest evaluations as to what works and what needs to be modified, what needs further study. And they've helped countries that have big advances, such as Cuba, in the medical fields, but may not have at all the ability to market those medications in a way that the rest of the world has access. But they've invited Cuban scientists to set up their own labs in China to process and make these, bring it to a global market. So it's sharing things online, yes, but it's also helping countries to do their own sharing of things that they have introduced and recognized. And when I say it's an evergreen process, that is what I mean. It's constantly changing. And we need to look at it that way. The same thing with ocean fishing. They found if you do ocean farming too close to the shoreline, the pollutants are very damaging to coastal people. But further out in the ocean, in big pens that they've built, that problem doesn't exist. So it was another area where they produced their own studies as to this works, and other times saying, well, this didn't work so well and we need to rethink it. And we should see all these things as a process. So I'm going to ask a last time, and I don't want Lynn and Kyle to have to be dealing with the library in Portland if they tell us we have to suddenly shut down, to ask if there are further comments. But think about how you can, with China Changes Everything, as a book, as the videos, as the podcasts, open up discussions with people and look at the material that's constantly put out daily by Carlos on the Friends of Socialist China website and on the lists. There's not a day that goes by I don't get new material. So I think that's also been very helpful for all of us here we're sort of US group of Friends of Socialist China from all different political groups and organizations. And we're studying China along with making change right here. And all of us are also activists and militants in the streets. We're not academic specialists, and we're always looking for new material to share. Any final words?
We just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, good.
I just wanted to share the map. I don't know if you can see a map, but essentially this is a map of the Tibetan headlands, which then becomes the Lancang River, which then becomes the Mekong River. You can see that it moves through 4 countries. China withdraws 4% of the water. It affects 0.052% of the total river. And then all the other little images that you see are dams and catchments and storage areas and irrigation. So essentially, the Stimson Center, along with the New York Times, has put out a lot of propaganda attacking China for its very, very small number of dams in the Tibetan headlands. But actually, you can see that the vast majority of dams and water disruption is happening much, much lower. But they're looking for, by hook or crook, for some way to attack China's very, very impressive ecological developments in energy development.
Thank you, KG. We'll take that as last word.
So,
sorry, Lynn?
Yeah. Sarah?
Yeah.
Sorry, Lynn? Yeah, we just want to say here in Portland, thank you for coming. And it was great. Yeah. We really appreciate everything, the speakers and all the participants.
I want to say each of these speakers are really activists in their own right, who studied intensely in their spare time. studied intensely in their spare time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.